Hi everyone, thanks for joining ReachIvy's Financing Education Abroad webinar today. In our services of webinars, this is one of those topics that is really on the minds of everyone. So from parents, to all candidates, and our aim today is really to provide an overview of financial costs and a sense of funding options for everyone looking to do their studies abroad. So my aim today is really to take you through a bit of research around how things work when you think about financing your education abroad. What are the costs involved, as well as a few things around how do you think of funding them. So I'm going to start briefly with just a bit of my background so that everyone on the call knows my background. So I'm a senior counselor at ReachIvy. I help candidates like you all on the call, mainly with interview preparation and help thinking about and preparing for interviews, not just for undergrad, but through all courses that require interviews. My background is I grew up in Mumbai. I did my Bachelor's of Science focused on Information Technology from St. Xavier's College here in Mumbai. Then I worked in strategy consulting at Dalberg, which is a strategy consulting firm that's focused on international development issues. I did that for 4 years, got a breadth of experience across a wide range of sectors, and then went to Harvard Business School for my MBA. After my MBA, I have been working with Corning Incorporated, which is a Fortune 500 manufacturing firm that specializes in glass-based technologies. And I'm part of their MBA leadership development program. My work experience has spanned across geographies. I have worked in India, in the US, as well as had some projects during my consulting days in Bangladesh and Kenya. Now, financing my education is something that's really close to me because I received a lot of scholarships when I was pursuing my MBA at HBS, including the JN Tata Scholarship, the KC Mahindra Scholarship. So I've experienced the process and would love to share it with you all. So as we start today, the first thing that I want everyone to sort of get their baseline is everyone thinks about finances as you think about higher education abroad. So as this tidbit says, a lot of students are preferring to go abroad for higher studies. You might have seen the latest reports which say the number of students from India as well as other countries going abroad has increased over the years. But of course, there are considerations around financials, right? One of them is the rupee depreciating, and especially if you're from India, that financial burden increases significantly as the currency depreciates. So the point of this is, it's on everyone's mind, and we want to make sure that you have a much better understanding of the costs as well as then how to think of financing them. So before I start, I just want to make sure everyone on the call knows that there is a option for chat in the window. So if you have any questions through the call as I go through my presentation, feel free to enter them in that chat window, and if time permits, I will try to address as many of them as I can towards the end of the call. All right, so let's start with just getting a fundamental understanding of what it means when you think about doing your higher education abroad. So there are, as you think about the costs, right, there are a multitude of costs that come in with thinking about applying online. So of course, the first one is, even before you start your education there, you have to apply, and there are application costs associated with each application. It differs according to the universities, it differs according to the country, it differs according to which course, and so on. But there are those costs associated with your application. Now, then as you move forward with your application, there are, of course, the course fees. There are travel fees that you have to incur. There is housing. There is, when you stay abroad, there's, of course, your day-to-day expenditure. So as you think about costs, it's not just purely the course costs that you have to think of, which are, of course, no doubt the bulk of maybe the overall structure, but there are these allied costs that you cannot ignore. And you have to have a holistic sense of how you think about when you have to apply abroad, a holistic sense around what these costs mean. So to highlight a few of the undergrad average costs as well as postgrad costs, I want to start off with giving everyone on the call a sense of what are the average undergrad costs if you think about different schools in different countries, so that everyone has that expectation or as well as an understanding of what that means. So let's look at the undergrad costs. And here the key point is these are annual costs. So please do remember, as you look at budgets online, know what those costs are depending on the length of the program. So for undergrad, for example, in the US, it may be a 4-year degree. In the UK, it might be a 3-year degree. But as we highlighted, for the US, if you look at, for example, Columbia, the average annual costs are close to 80,000 USD per year. Now, within these, how they're categorized, as I was trying to say earlier, one part, which is the largest part in all of them, is your tuition. For Columbia, it's close to $55,000 a year. There is room and boarding, there is transportation, and there's other miscellaneous expenses. Now, some of these are discretionary. So, for example, if you choose to go by a bus instead of a private car, the costs will differ. But each university wants everyone to understand an average, for an average student, what could these costs look like? So as we've said, these figures above are averages, and again, actual living expenses can be higher or lower, but I think these should give you a good sense of the different cost structures. So Columbia, I just said what these costs were. If you look at Oxford, and again, these are now in pounds, it's around 54,500 pounds. If you look at Singapore, these are in Singapore dollars. Then McGill in Canada, you're looking at a different cost structure. And then just to give a baseline for people who might also be looking at costs in India. So if you go to IIT Bombay, it costs you 1,37,000 rupees a year. So this should give you a good flavor of what it means if you're thinking about an undergrad degree. Now let's look at masters. Now the masters cost structure also varies significantly, and if you look at the top of this list, please do focus on the duration of these programs, because master's programs really vary right from a 1-year program to a 16-month program to a 2-year program or more, depending on what area, what geography, and other aspects of where you decide to do your masters. But again, we do want to give you a sense of the different cost structures. So it's the chart here is similarly structured. There are different categories of expenses. Again, some of these are discretionary, depending on where and how you choose to exercise them. But this should give you a good sense of what it means. So now if you look at the LLM at LSE, the London School of Economics, it's a 48-month program, and the average cost that's highlighted by the university is around 35,000 pounds. Then if you go for the MIM program at the London Business School, it's a one-year program, but you see that the cost is higher now per year, right? Then you look at the public policy program at Harris in the US, the cost structure is different. So again, as you look at different programs, don't go on tidbits of information just based on one program or the other. Please do your research. And universities are usually very good at putting across what the average costs are, and they update them every year. And you will also see that some of these increase a bit every year. So you need to be updated on whichever program you choose to do and what those costs look like. So there is transparency upfront in terms of what it would cost you. Now, moving on from the masters, the other big category is for a lot of people who want to do an MBA, and I was one of these people a few years back as I was thinking about doing my MBA. Now, the MBA costs are usually higher. So you see, if you look at the different cost structures that I had presented previously, you'll see a difference in terms of how these costs are. But these, as you would see here, are linear in a sense as you look at, say, doing an MBA in India versus doing an MBA in the US. So they increase significantly. However, again, the other point to note is the duration. So for ISB in India, it's a one-year program, and the average costs are around 27 lakh Indian rupees. As you look at other schools, say for example NUS in Singapore, the average costs there are around 70,000 USD. Sorry, 70,000 Singapore dollars. Now, think of the different programs in the lens of duration as well as where you might want to do them depending on the geography, as well as if you're interested in one school versus the other because of different reasons. If you look at the US, the average cost at Stanford University is around more than 115, 116,000 USD. So hopefully this gives some sense, and this gives everyone on the call a good baseline around, as you look at different programs, you really need to understand that there are different cost structures, and then plan accordingly as you think about doing your education abroad. Now, the biggest question as you think about then, okay, how do I look at some of these costs and what does it mean? And of course, some of these figures look high based on where you've worked before, as well as what you might have paid for your education if you did that in India. However, we do want to give a sense to people around how do people who get there, how do students who get there fund these schools or fund the education of these schools. So this is a chart which speaks about how a typical student pays for graduate school and where does the funding come from. So as you see, 53% of how a typical student pays for graduate school, 53% of the funding comes from student borrowing, right? So, and here borrowing can mean you borrow from a traditional bank, you borrow from another funding source, you borrow from family, you borrow from friends, but there is some amount of debt that a typical student would incur as they fund education abroad. Now, the other large chunk at 24%, right, is student earnings. Now, this is, of course, this is for graduate schools. A lot of people who go abroad might have work experience and would have accumulated some savings. So a lot of people decide to put those savings as well as personal earnings towards those overall costs. The third category is grants and scholarships, which is of course something that you have to, in a lot of cases, apply for. There are different funding sources that we will speak about later in the call. But that's, again, to give you a sense, a significant chunk of how people fund it. And then there are aspects around external contributions, as well as if someone else borrows, if your family borrows for you, and so on. But if you look at a typical student at graduate school, this should give you a fair sense that it's a diversified pool of resources where people go to. It's not one source that people use to fund their education. So as you think about it, keep that in mind, that it may not be just one source of funding that you might have to avail, but different sources of funding that you might have to access. So which are these different sources? And some of the questions that I am seeing here, right, are around what are which scholarships are there, when do you apply for it, um, how to approach the university for financial aid. But before we get into all of the specifics, let's understand what these different sources mean, what these different sources are. So first is university scholarships and aid. So there are three different types of financial aid depending on the course, the university, and so on, but it can be broadly classified into three buckets. So one is need-based, second is need-blind, and third is merit-based. So the first one, if you look at, is need-based. Now, this is where the school, and again, if you remember, we are talking about university aid and scholarships. So for need-based, you have to indicate that there is need for financial aid based on the application that you might make to the university. And here the school focuses on whether that particular candidate and student really requires the scholarship based on personal finances, based on personal history, and so on. So if you think about the costs, if you're from India, for example, and you're going to study in the US, universities understand that the incomes as well as the currencies are at a very different level, and who international students who can afford, um, or not afford, right? They want to categorize them based on the need. So some of the need-based scholarships, we've highlighted some universities, right, which look at these: University of Chicago, Vanderbilt, Cornell, among others. Now, another point to note is if you are an international student who can afford the cost of attendance, you may be given a preferential treatment. That's because they do want students from a diverse set of backgrounds, and it's one of the criteria that they may apply. And each university would have those. So that's the first bucket, which is need-based financial aid. The second one is need-blind, and as it says, universities would look at students regardless of their ability to pay the cost of attendance. So it doesn't matter what your income is, what your family background is, what your financial status is. The admissions process is need blind. So you don't, when you apply, you don't highlight financial aid as a criteria. So there is no disadvantage of any kind in the admissions process for financial aid applicants. So in the need-based financial aid, in most cases, you might have to declare when in your application form your income as well as if you need a scholarship or not. But need-blind admissions are, or need-blind financial aid is, of course, around the fact that that wouldn't be a disadvantage for you. So everyone who comes in, university won't know whether you need the scholarship or not before they decide to admit you. And a few of these colleges, universities, are Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, etc. So that's the second category. The third is merit-based, and here it's university, it's very university course background specific. Now, this is aid that's granted on the basis of special skills, talents, or abilities that the university might be looking for, or there is an existing scholarship in place. Now, this is just based on specific criteria. Here, your financial situation wouldn't matter. What would matter is whether you have those skills, talents, abilities, expertise in that specific area that the merit-based scholarship is based on. Now, some of the universities are Boston, as well as University of Warwick. Now, the fact to note is when you apply, please do look at what kind of financial aid the university would offer. This should be either highlighted on the university's website, or you will of course see applicants talking about it online. There would be external articles that would be written on it. So it would be very useful for you to understand before you apply as to what kind of financial aid is available. Another interesting bit that a lot of universities do is they highlight what is the average scholarship that's provided to under some of these categories. So you might get a sense of that, and it'll be helpful for you to plan accordingly based on that. So these are the different types of financial aid that universities usually offer. Now, to my last point around what is the average age aid that's awarded. So here we're looking at mainly undergraduates, and most of these are US based universities. So you look at university, the second column gives you a sense of what is the percentage of international. As I had said earlier, a lot of they understand that coming from an international background, the income criteria as well as the ability to pay cost currency would differ. So hence you see that more than 50% of international undergraduates received aid at these universities, which is a very large amount. Now, what was the average aid that's awarded? The average money or the average amount that's awarded is upwards of 50,000 USD. So you really see that that's a pretty significant amount that a lot of the top universities offer, and this goes to back to a lot of what we've already covered, including what was the cost, and as you come to think of applying the different types of aid, and then this clearly states the significant contribution that universities make to help students from different backgrounds and really compose a class which is. Now, what can you do, right? How do you understand what are these different types of financial packages as well as options that you have? So there are a few things. Now, a lot of universities are, if you go from left to right, are accessible. So you call up someone at the university if there's a very specific question that you're not able to understand, and they would be more than happy to help you. A lot of you might be regularly checking the relevant university websites. A lot of the data that we pull together is in fact from the university websites because they are very transparent in terms of how they look at it. So keep checking that. There are different scholarships that open up in different years, different merit scholarships, scholarships for people with certain backgrounds. So please do keep checking those, and if you're eligible for them. Like the university as well as ReachIvy Facebook social media pages, because a lot of announcements, tidbits are posted both by the universities as well as ReachIvy does a lot of research and keeps up to date with what's happening and what kind of scholarships, financial aid options are open. And then, of course, when you do the actual application, based on your background, do indicate the interest in financial aid and provide the supporting documents as required by the university. So these are just a different, this is just a different lens on what or different things that you can keep doing right from now. This is not something that you do 1 week before the application. I would urge everyone to keep updated based on which university, which course, so that you have a good sense before and as you're applying. So that was the university scholarships and university-based funding. Now, there are external agencies and external funding options. Um, if you remember my pie chart before, it had different buckets around how people fund, and this is one of those buckets. So external funding options are, as we first said, on the top is your school, your college, which we covered before. But there is a plethora of organizations that might be able to help. Going in a clockwise direction, there are community organizations and associations. So if you belong, if you're a part of certain clubs, or if you're a part of certain community organizations as well as associations, a lot of them help people, help students access different kinds of aids. So different kinds of loans or different kinds of scholarships. And these are very specific, they have specific requirements. But there are organizations, especially community organizations and associations, which could help. Now, there are government agencies which might help depending on what program it is, what school it is, or what the area of expertise in the degree is. There are different agencies that might be able to help. And again, all of these require applications from your end, but just want to give you a sense of the different types. So the third one is there are clubs. For example, the Rotary Club. That could be if you're a member of it, or if you're a member of some other organization. There might be specific scholarships for higher education abroad. And the last bucket is foundations and international organizations. So as I'd said in my introduction, I received a lot of fellowships from organizations, including the J.N. Tata Endowment, KC Mahindra Trust, etc. So there are a lot of foundations which specifically focus, especially in India, on helping students access financial aid towards their education. So in summary here, know that apart from your university, there are external funding options. You will have to do a lot of research to understand which of these are applicable to you. But again, ReachIvy as well as your own research, you come up with a good list of options after you get it. Which are some of these? So I gave you a description of what kinds of organizations. I want to highlight a few here. Now there is the United World Colleges, UWC, has a Davis Scholars Program to help people go through the United World Colleges. Now the European Commission, you might have heard of the Erasmus Mundus Scholarship for International Students. That's a very highlighted scholarship, and they have a lot of information available online. So if you're looking at the EU, look at Erasmus Mundus as one of the options. There's specific criteria that they've laid out. Then the Aga Khan Foundation scholarships for this Aga Khan Foundation specifically looks at postgraduate studies. So if there is an application process, there are timelines to it, there is a lot of background material that you need. So, but you have such foundations who are willing and able to help for specific things. And then the last point around clubs and organizations, as I mentioned earlier, there is Rotary. The Rotary Foundation has global grants. So think about these. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but this is just to give you a flavor of the kind of different things that exist. And usually once people get in, so if you get into a university in Europe, there are specific foundations or scholarships such as the Erasmus Mundus to then help you narrow down which ones of these you might apply to. So hopefully that helps give a flavor of the different types of um, options that exist. I did want to highlight a few of these foundations in India that help. So apart from the ones we mentioned earlier, now the Public Health Foundation of India is another one. Uh, the Narottam Seksaria Foundation provides interest-free or low-interest loans. That's a very um, that's a very well-known foundation that's based in Mumbai that helps. The other ones, the KC Mahindra Education Trust, the J.N. Tata Endowment, there is the R.D. Setna Scholarship. So I applied to a lot of these and was lucky enough to receive scholarships and help from a lot of these institutions. And believe me, it does help a lot, uh, not just from a perspective of providing you with financial aid as you look at going and attending university, but also some of these, for example, the J.N. Tata Endowment has been offering scholarships for a long time, and by long time I mean decades. So there is a very eminent group of alumni who have got these scholarships, and you can also access that alumni base, being a part of that cohort of people who get the endowment or who get those scholarships. So look at the benefits that you get from these, not just in terms of the actual money that they provide you, but also a larger benefit that you might be a part of a very selected group of people uh, and eminent personalities who might have got these decades before you. Now, apart from the foundations, there are other foreign collaborations. So there is the USIEF, the Fulbright Scholarship, the Rhodes Scholarship, the ones that are very well known and well regarded. These also have their own um, application criteria as well as what the requirements are, and those should also be looked at as you're thinking about it. Now, a pertinent question came up, and I do want to address a couple of those before we move on to the next section. So, the first one was on my point earlier around that scholarships are offered post admissions, but how do you apply for it before the admissions, as I mentioned? Now, as you heard, there are different types of aid that's applicable based on which university. So in case it is a need-based scholarship, the application form would require you to state that you would like to apply for it and you are in need of funding or in need of scholarship towards your education there. So you wouldn't know the result of it, of course, beforehand, but when you fill in the application form, there is, in a lot of cases, an ability for you to highlight that you would be interested in the scholarship or interested in some sort of financial aid. So it's more about having indicated an interest in it. Depending on the university, they might require additional details, but that's how you apply for admission, or you apply for financial aid along with your admissions process. Okay. In terms of the other question, there's a question that has come in, which is when should we apply for scholarships with foundations? Now, usually these are after you've secured your admission, because they require proof of you having secured that admission. So in a lot of cases, if it is not the university aid, a lot of these application processes only happen after you've secured admission. So I thought those were two pertinent questions. So thanks for those who posted them. So regarding the application processes as well, as I said, it may not be just a simple matter of ticking a box and saying you're interested. There are, depending on the university, specific questions that you might have to answer beyond the application process. So we've listed some of the sample questions that people have asked or universities have asked in their financial aid applications, as well as other other organizations that have asked them. So the first one, if you were given 1 year to spend in service on behalf of others, what would you choose to do and why? Indicate a person who has had a significant influence on you and describe that influence. Describe incidents in your personal and professional life where you showed leadership. An earlier question a few years ago might have been, imagine that it's the year 2020, what will you be doing and where? So it really depends on what scholarship it is, but know that there might be additional requirements for you to write essays or write statements which go beyond just the application form, and you should be prepared and well prepared to answer those when you apply, because a lot of people would be applying for it and you need to put in as much effort as you do in your actual application towards your financial aid application as well. So the other big category which was highlighted is funding from banks and private lenders. So when you hear the word debt, usually student debt, banks come, I'm sure banks and logos of banks come to the top of your mind. But even when you think of debt and where you access loans, there are different types of institutions and different places where you can get them. So apart from the financial aid that's offered directly by the university, you have certain banks or certain financing institutions which are affiliated to the university. So when I went to the Harvard Business School, we were eligible to apply for a loan, a collateral-free loan from the Harvard University Employees Credit Union. There is the Ohio University Credit Union. So a lot of universities have their institutions called credit unions, which are directly affiliated to the university. So if you get in, it becomes a bit easier for you to apply, especially if you don't have a co-signer in those places or you don't have collateral to show and so on. The requirements vary, but usually speaking, I would say that university linked institutions might have, or you might have easier access if you get into that specific university. The second one is, of course, large banks. So here I'm talking about foreign banks. So you have Citizens Bank, you have Discover Bank in the US, which offer loans to international students, but some of them do require you to have a co-signer. And by a co-signer, I mean someone who may be a permanent resident of that place, who might be a citizen of that place, to act as a guarantor and a co-signer on your behalf. If you have access to someone like that, such avenues do offer lower interest rates because they are able to have a co-signer. So do think about those. All the information again is available online, as well as the financial aid office from your school might be able to help based on where their students earlier have accessed these loans. The third bucket is, of course, then local banks. So a lot of the Indian institutions, if you're from India, offer student loans. They may have different criteria depending on what kind of collateral is required, what is the average interest rate, and so on. But know that there are institutions here who provide loans for education abroad. Then the fourth category is private lenders. And a lot of these institutions have started funding international students in the past few years, which is great because you have another source to compare it from. So one is Prodigy Finance, which offers loans for international students depending on what course and what school you go to. There is SoFi, which is another institution in the US, which is an institution that offers loans. Again, some of these do have criteria around what kind of visa you have, what kind of institution you've got into. But the point of this is there is a variety of private as well as public sector banks and other institutions which are available for you. You just have to understand which one might be better for you depending on if you can access them and what is your availability in terms of co-signers, collateral, etc., etc. So that's a flavor of private loans. or loans from banks and other institutions. The other bucket where how people fund is work study. Now, when you go to a foreign university, a lot of them would allow you to work alongside your studies, and this is mainly work on campus. So you might be eligible to work in the library, you might be eligible to work in a cafe, you might be working in the students association office. There are a lot of avenues there, and it is a pretty significant part of how people usually fund their day-to-day expenses, and also a good way for people to know other people, know what the working culture is like, etc. So please do explore these. A lot of these opportunities also require applications once you get in. So know what kind of options there are. The other ones here are using with professors as TAs or research assistants or associates. So there are these options as well. So please do explore those as you think about it. The The next one are certain universities offer discounts. Now, these are specific again to your application, but talk to the university to see if that might be a way. Instead of them providing you direct funding, they might offer you a discount overall on either the tuition or the total cost of attendance, etc. And that might be another way where financial aid might be available to you, but not as money that comes to you, but as a discount to what the university fees are, etc. But again, specific to universities, specific to courses, that's my broader point around each of these. And for all of these, right, the one thing to know is there are options, but it's the outcome is dependent on how much effort you put in. There are applications that are required, as I said, which require essays, which require SOPs, which require documents. Then there are banks, which will require, again, a ton of documentation, which might take time to come together. Then there are other requirements such as co-signers, or even if you take a loan in India, uh, there are co-signer requirements here. There are documents there, right? So don't think of the app once you get in and that your application process is done and you're ready to start, and you'll just get financial aid uh, easily. Most cases that I have looked at, as well as my particular case, it takes a lot of time to collect a lot of documents and be prepared and make the informed choice, because it is a pretty important decision. As we saw, the costs for, and as I'm seeing the questions as well, uh, costs are a concern for a lot of people. So as we look at this important decision about once you get in, how do you fund your education, start early. It's very important that you have enough time so that you don't make a rush decision, right? Because this has impact for you, not just in a year or a couple of years, but if you're paying off a loan over 10, 15 years, that decision that you take now will matter. So that's where I want to end the formal part. We do have 15 minutes. So what I thought of doing is I will cover some of the questions towards the end that I'm getting, as well as the questions that usually are asked. But here's what you should be doing next. So ReachIvy has a wide array of experts who have experience across the applications process, including very personal situations that people might have. So sign up for a personalized counseling session with one of our experts. You'll see a list of our experts on the website. Work with our experts on your applications. So we highly suggest that people work through the application process with us so that they can get a holistic understanding of their application and be prepared not just for getting in, but also for then the financial aid applications and so on. Apply for the ReachIvy scholarship. So ReachIvy does offer scholarships to people either for application process or for counseling sessions, please do take a look at the website. And there is an application process for that as well. So hope you do apply and take advantage of the ReachIvy scholarship. We do a lot of webinars, we do a lot of in-person events at different places, which helps students on different aspects. So as we did the webinar today on financing, there are other webinars, there are the sessions that we do. Uh, these are on our website, these are on our Facebook pages, as well as social media updates are posted. So please do register for the upcoming events and you get a good sense, holistic sense of the other aspects of the application process as well. And there are loan partners that ReachIvy can connect you with. So please do reach out on the email address below or give ReachIvy a call. And ReachIvy, everyone would always be happy to help you and assist you on any specific question that you may have. So here's a list of frequent questions that are asked, and I do want to cover them before we end the session. So a question that has come in is, being an Indian student, is it worth taking this amount of loan, which is a huge amount, right? Based on, for a lot of people who do go abroad, that's a big question that comes in. And a similar question was posted around, is it worth applying for a loan amount? And there's a specific figure here, which is 48 to 60 lakhs if we get it through a loan. If you or your parents can't afford it, is it safe to apply for the full-time loan, etc.? So how I want to tackle this question, right, is if it is worth it or not to do the course is a decision that everyone has to take individually. The way to think about it are a lot of factors. I don't believe it should be just based on one factor, which is this is the amount that you will have to incur towards education, right? When you think about education abroad, it is of course going to cost you some amount. Now, how you should think about it is, okay, is it a course that you really want to do? What does it cost? What are the average salaries after you graduate from it? If you're in a sector that pays X versus Y, is that something that you want to incur? Where do you want to be after graduation? Do you want to come back to India? Do you want to be working abroad? What have other people done earlier? Then, of course, then is the question of what kind of financial aid exists and so on. So I want to tackle this question to say that if it is worth it or not is something that everyone has to determine individually. It is a fact that a lot more people have started going abroad, and you would see that through reports and so on. So you just have to make a decision for yourself as to whether it's going to be personally worth it for you to access an amount of loan or other financial aid, which of course might for you at this point might be a large amount. So think of it from a holistic sense. Now, the second question is, what are some opportunities, right? So the allied question here that comes into mind is, even if I do think it's worth taking that amount of or going to a university paying X amount, you should think about it again in buckets of what type of financial aid is available. So loans are just one amount, so don't think of it purely in terms of loans. You might be able to break it down and say, I would need X% of that total through a loan. I might be able to get Y% of it through financial aid, which is either free money that you don't have an obligation to return, or you might get an interest-free loan, or you might get other forms of scholarships. So think of breaking that total amount down into different buckets and then tackling the question of, is that something that makes sense to everyone individually? Right? And then, of course, then the question is, what options exist in those different buckets, which we have tried to cover through this call. So the other question that came in is, when is the right time to start approaching professors to check if they have any RA or TA positions available? Now, usually you would want to do that once you get in, because that might help the professors also understand that you have a genuine interest, given that you've got in and you're considering the opportunities. A lot of these are also accessible online, or once you get in, they might give you access to a portal which have some of these. The other way to find about these is go get in touch with people who are already at the school. That's usually a good benchmark in any case for you to understand, once you get in, how do these processes work? What does it mean to be an RA? What does it mean to be a TA? And what kind of professors? What are their working styles, etc.? So to answer the question again, usually do it after you get in and get a sense from other people as to when they did that and when they were able to access it. All right. So the second question on my list here on the slide that we got was, what are non-collateral loan opportunities? So a lot of providers such as banks as well as other financing institutions want you to provide some sort of collateral. Right? Either it's a property, either it's FDs, either it is other forms that they have specific requirements for that you have to show for them to grant you a loan. There are certain institutions that may be willing to grant loans without necessarily having collaterals that you have to show. Some of these, in my experience, have been, as I was pointing out on the slide earlier, university linked credit unions or university linked institutions. They will grant you a loan based on the fact that you've got admission into that university. Again, the size of loan that's accessible, is there a maximum limit, what are the interest rates and so on differ. So usually if there is no collateral, the interest rates are higher because there is a larger risk for banks to take those. So you have to consider that. So that's one. The second I have seen are private lenders. So private lenders, including, it may be a Prodigy Finance, it may be SoFi, it may be other institutions, where they have looked at what the risk is for providing loans for people who come from international backgrounds and don't have collaterals. The interest rates again vary a lot depending on the course and depending on your personal application. I would say the third bucket is also the foreign banks. So they may not necessarily want collateral such as property, etc., but they might compensate for that in terms of you needing a cosigner. So when you think about collateral, it's a mechanism for banks to, or institutions to, adjust for risk when they provide loans for education. And with that comes different interest rates, different abilities based on you have a cosigner or not. So there are options. It would really depend on your specific situation and what you have accessible or not. Okay, so the third one, are there any student loans offered by universities? What's the average interest rate? Are Indian students eligible? So I've covered this in bits and pieces. If you have a specific question about a specific university, reach out to the ReachIvy team and they would be willing and glad to help you figure a specific university out or a specific situation out. The question around, are Indian students eligible? I can't answer this across the board because the eligibility criteria varies. If it's a bank, it's not as much about whether you're an Indian student or someone from different nationality as much as it is about whether you have access to a cosigner or not. What's the average interest rate? This is a decently easy question to figure out it when you do some research online. I don't think there is an average interest rate for student loans. If you have a cosigner, it's lower. If you don't have it, it's higher. But what you would see is what's available online based on the different banks. Right? Just make sure here you look at interest rates for international students versus those from the origin of that country where the institution is, because the risk for banks to lend to someone as an international student is higher. So usually the interest rates are higher for international students than they might be for someone who's able to access a government loan in the US, for example. Yeah, so just make sure you look at this. Now, how do we manage the finances while studying? The work study point that I highlighted is one way for you to earn while you study and pay off some of the ongoing expenses. People look at that, work 20 hours a week or whatever is eligible, whatever they're eligible for, and use that to fund their ongoing expenses. Some people have savings, so some people use that through the year. Internship between the first and second year, if you're doing a 2-year course, that's a good option for not just getting work experience, but also some amount of money to help you through the second year of the program. Right? So again, a lot of options available depending on personal circumstances, I would say. Tips on to plan it. That's a great question, because that's something that's on mind for everyone. Right? How, if you take a large amount of loan, will you be able to repay it? How will you be able to repay it? The key here is planning. Right? The second part of this is, how do you plan it? Now, the best way to think about this is, once you when you're accessing the loan, look at what the average salaries are after graduation. Look at what you might be able to get when you land a job, right? And a lot of education loans do have a long timeline. So when you're thinking about loans and other financial aid, know that there will, depending on what you choose, there might be 10 to 15-year window around how you pay it, and that's a long amount of time. And as you graduate, you can then think about laying out a plan. Most of the loans, as far as I understand, have a deferred interest or deferred payment when you're in university, so you don't have to pay until you graduate, which is helpful because you then don't have to worry about repaying anything while you're in school. You can choose to, but it's not a necessity in most cases. Certain foundations, for example, have a varying repayment schedule. So one of the foundations that I got an interest-free loan from has a staggered repayment schedule. So I pay, say for example, 30% 2 years after graduation. Then I pay the rest 30% another year after it, and I pay the remaining 40% 3-4 years down the line. So that would help you stagger the repayments. Again, it's a personal planning exercise that I would urge everyone to keep thinking of as you think about accessing different kinds of financial options for you to go and attend a program of your choosing and your liking at an institution abroad. So we are at 2:30 p.m. right now. So thank you for attending this session. Hopefully it added to your knowledge and added to some of the understanding, and hopefully it addressed some of the questions, common questions that you might have had. I'm going to stop with just going to the previous slide again. Please do reach out if you have other questions, and if you want to know more about how you can go about the entire application process, not just the actual application process, but also how do you finance a lot of your education costs. So thanks again to everyone. Hopefully we addressed a lot of what you came in looking for, and we would love to continue remaining in touch with you. And good luck as you go through your application process.